From every corner of the earth sits glorious architecture. Magnificent structures that allegedly have no connection, yet very similar designs. This style of architecture, riddled with elegance and purpose, can be found in your neighborhood or in the middle of nowhere. And when you walk in, you are overwhelmed with a vibrant feeling of serenity, a feeling that modern-day architecture does not provide. The concept of a timeline that once existed, where structures were created with a completely different purpose. Yet, when we take a look back at who they told us built these structures, considering the timeline and the lack of technology, the story begins to crumble. And that story was taught to us all during a time when we were too young to question it. But when you shine an unbiased light upon the history books, you'll quickly uncover the lies of his story. But even before Rockefeller and his goons started the Board of Education, they already had our ancestors, and anyone who questioned their narrative would soon find themselves an unwilling resident of the original indoctrination camps. And where did they come from? Where did we all come from? If knowledge is truly power, then maintaining such power must rely on the absence of knowledge. Are you aware that every major city in America experienced a great fire? Candle fires that turn stone to dust, leaving behind a crime scene that resembles a war zone. Let's take a giant step back, perform our own investigations, question the history that was written by these victors. With a growing nationwide lack of trust for our leaders, it's time to discover the extent of the deceit and where the lie truly began.
What's being kept from us is huge. And you're talking earlier about the architecture. I really like to encourage people to do their research in their own communities, because you really do not have to go far to start chipping away at what they've told us and ask yourself a question: is this even possible? Is it possible that X building was built in the 1890s? And they're giving us timelines of like a year. It was built in a year. They want us to believe we didn't have the technology, that we were low tech, and yet we're building all of these amazing structures. This disparity between what the narrative says and what's actually there.
You have places, cities in America that look as though they were constructed in medieval Europe, when nothing was here and people showed up and just got started building from what we're told. One would assume that they would build with the means that were available to them. Wood, nails if they were lucky. What we get is this narrative that people were showing up and really making do with what they had.
What we learn about in school is there was nothing here. This land was free for the taking. The only inhabitants were wild Indians, and we built everything here. Everything you see in this country, in North America, because we're talking about Canada too, was built by us. After we got here, nothing here. They had to change the narrative. They had to destroy the evidence. They had to come up with an explanation for who built this, why they built it, when they built it. And they had to do that for a lot of buildings.
We are told that during the 1800s, the consensus of North America was low, extremely low, too low to justify the infrastructure within the timelines they've provided, too low to have the experience or knowledge on crafting these glorious buildings.
They're the most exquisite buildings I've ever seen, and there was only a population of a few thousand people at that time. And then I'm looking and there's mud roads and wooden sidewalks. And then I'm looking at this building that is just, it could be out of Paris or Prague. It's not computing. And so I'm realizing there again, there's a whole bunch of stories that have to be dug into, rethought, reconsidered, and in some cases completely discarded.
We no longer build like that. How does that happen in a realistic timeline? Wouldn't you be progressing year after year to have incredible buildings? Today, we would be building massive pyramids, massive courthouses that last forever. Instead, we have the complete opposite. And they're very cheap. The tools have upgraded supposedly, yet our construction has gotten worse. It's completely backwards.
There's evidence of a worldwide culture that existed in the not too distant past, and the evidence is everywhere. It's an interesting thing because, like, I've spent a lot of my life looking into ancient history and traveling around the world searching into the past. And it isn't until recently that I realised that it's actually, I don't have to travel to Egypt or anywhere. It's all right there in Sydney and in London and in San Francisco, and it's all around the world. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. All you got to do is look at the civilization you're living in with the right type of eyes, and you're sort of looking around your city and you're going, well, hang on, what's this building doing here? And why is there a building just like that in the Philippines? Why is there one in Japan? Apparently Japan's borders were closed, weren't they? Why are we finding what we're told is Greco-Roman style architecture in every country on earth? Was it really Greco-Roman style, or is it evidence of a culture that existed, a worldwide culture that existed right around the world in a not too distant past?
If I took a picture of this building behind me and asked any of these people, where do they think this building is in the world? I guarantee you most of them would say Rome or Europe somewhere. But no, it's right here in San Francisco. We have buildings like this all over the country, and they want us to believe that they were built in the early 1900s or the late 1800s with horse and buggy. And there's just no way that's true. These buildings were built by the prior civilization, master builders, the old world order.
This is the architecture I'm talking about. You'll find this anywhere in New Zealand, Australia, Hong Kong, North America, South America, all over Europe. It doesn't matter where you are, this architecture is replicated. The weird thing is, they akin it to being all built around the 1870s to 1900 mark. So all of the world just shit out of nowhere at the same time. There was nothing before it. Does it make any sense?
I don't think antiquity is a long time ago. I think this civilization went just before us. You know, the Edwardians are supposed to be around the time of the First World War. So within grandparents' living memory, yet we know nothing about them. It's the control mechanism that covers it up with the education system. They got the news, they got the narrative, they got, you know, the mainstream to tell you how things are, but the reality is completely different. History goes to the victors, okay? Somebody invaded this place and took over a beautiful, through jealousy, using trade routes, using the sea, and they took over this place. They covered all of this fine architecture with their iconography. So there's literally been a cover-up of history more than one way.
If you look at Capitol buildings all over the earth, they look the same. They do. They've got columns, they've got domes. It was not random. And every story we're told in our historical narrative about how a place got started was some guy was the first settler there, bought some land, subdivided it, sold it, and pretty soon you have a city. But the whole narrative is based, especially in North America, that there wasn't anything there, and we built it all.
You could look at it, the whole building was a work of art. So there was obviously some pride that went behind that. It wasn't just about making money and throwing shit up as fast as you could. It was about building with a purpose, and that there was symbolism behind these things.
They built them to last. They built them with a certain level of artistry and attention to detail and customization. You see, now you'll go through a neighborhood and every home looks the same. This neighborhood, perfect example. But everything had its own identity, and it was steeped in customization and ornate attention to detail.
We don't get that now.
You don't get that now.
Even when you look at the beauty of the buildings from that Tartarian era, if people were actually paying for labour, and you had to get carpenters in there, no, you'd never build buildings like that if you were working by an hourly rate. You'd just be getting it functional. People used to build that stuff because they love to build, because beauty is actually a function. Beauty is actually a function of a creation. When you're living in a world of beauty, your soul is expands and it's expansive. You can create. You can become all that you can be. And if you can become all that you can be, you sure as hell don't need rulers. So that's why they don't want you to know about any of this sort of stuff. Oh no, we're at the pinnacle of our civilization now. This is the best it gets. The best we've ever done. Look at the quality of these walls. Hey, fuck that Gothic shit. Look at this. You know? I mean, yeah.
When I was like 8 years old, I started researching the pyramids and stuff because no one knew how they were built, you know? So I started looking into ancient history. And as I said, I'd spent most of my life traveling around the world looking at all these ancient sites, and then suddenly you see this civilization that's right there under your nose. It's been there the whole time in all of our Western cities. They covered everything up. It wasn't just inserting the Dark Ages, they changed everything. So when we start even trying to piece it together through the history that they've given us, how do we know any of these places are even the names that we're told they are? How do we know any of these things? How do we know any of the history is true? Because it's not they just put it all together and just shuffle the deck and throw it out to a bunch of countries and name them whatever they want. So it's become extraordinarily difficult to try to trace it through any mainstream history records. All we've got to really go on is the architecture itself. It wasn't thousands of years ago, it was just hundreds of years ago. Even if you go down to South America and look at some of the temples down there, the edges on them, the beveling on them, this is only a few hundred years old. This is not old ancient structures. These are new walls. I've gone there and looked at them myself. You know, nothing is what they tell us. You know, everything is a lie. It's just how big the lie is. You know, and the bigger the lie is, the easier it is for people to believe it.
There's a lot of architecture in the world today on every continent of buildings that are much, much larger than you would think people of our height would build. And so I gave the example of the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. as being one of those buildings. The Basilica, the National Shrine at Catholic University in Washington is another example. A huge, huge building.
Look at the Texas state capitol. It's incredible. You've got these pillars around the whole area. It's kind of the same thing as the Vatican.
I do wonder about Iolani Palace. How old is it? And one thing to look at is it took them 2 years, from 1880 to 1882. How did they build that beautiful, beautiful building? Was that building here longer? Was it here before Captain Cook? There's no construction pictures and there's none of that stuff. So no power tools, horse and buggy. How is that even possible?
When you have St. John's Cathedral in New York City, that's not a style of cathedral. That's the real McCoy.
Could you imagine that being built today? I think that everybody would go crazy.
They have no legitimacy whatsoever, except to trick us and convince us that they do. And that's how they've managed to get away with this. So they could insert themselves in and set themselves up as overlords.
Stone building is not just something you can pick up and teach a convict in a matter of weeks, like we're told about Americas and Australia. Truly, that's how we're told these countries were built.
Just extremely sophisticated and technical engineering involved. And you know, there's so many questions that come to mind. How'd they do it? If they were our size, how could they even accomplish this with the technology we were told we had at the time?
You'll find many of the banks, post offices, government centers, especially 100 years ago, were facilitated in these large, glorious stone structures. So, number one, the rulers wanted the stronger, more durable, more imposing structures for themselves. That sends a message to the people you're ruling over. We're going to play a little game here with two alternatives, right? And you or I, whoever the person deciding between these two is, I'd like for you to pretend you're a world leader. You're not a good one. You're evil and you'd like to rule the people underneath your thumb. Or you're looking to maintain control over people. Bear with me and envision these two alternatives. In the first, we have the opinion, the theory, the teachings, the paradigm that man is nothing but a carnivorous monkey in outer space, floating on a rock for no reason, in the middle of nowhere by accident. And this all got kicked off 43 bajillion years ago on a Tuesday at 6 o'clock p.m. And they can determine this with their color star charts and moon dust and things like that. And going on to a long, vast existence of nothing, just surviving by instinct, on par with an animal. Justification for any morals, ethics, no real pursuit of true happiness, no pursuit of harmony and understanding here on the earth. And this is all what we're living today. There's no spiritual accountability. There's no understanding of beauty. Well, on the other alternative, on this side, we have a purposeful creation, a purposeful design to not only the human being, but the entire earth, the laws of nature. No theories, only laws ingrained into existence, woven into the fabric of reality by the designer, the creator, not in a linear sense, not, back then, this many years ago or that. It doesn't work that way. This is the fabric of what we live in. There is a value placed on beauty. Why? Because God has a beautiful creation. In order to return the favor, mankind has an impulse to create beautiful things. In recent times, this has been robbed from us, but nonetheless, it's in the soul of every human being to not only value beauty, to seek it out, to place a high emphasis on it. This is how the ancients maintained their ways of life. Geometric, proportional laws of beauty.
Like it in the whole world. It's right in our own hometown.
Grandpa, they'll never tear it down, will they?
Well, they'd better not.
Well, they didn't tear all of them down. Not that they put them up in the first place. The World's Fairs showcase many of our ancient structures in their grandest form. Yet, we are sold the story that these are alleged temporary buildings, all being built in record-breaking time for the purpose of a worldly gathering, a gathering to showcase new technology, or perhaps just taking credit for the old. With so many lights on display, one would only assume that power plants and electrical resources such as wiring and even electricians were widely available. However, during this time period, that wasn't the case at all. Therefore, how were these vast areas in the late 1800s able to light the evening sky, like a modern-day theme park? Or was there a different method for harvesting energy? Now ask yourself, what part of these magnificent buildings look temporary? What part of these buildings look rushed? And most importantly, what part of these buildings look new? Or you can just believe these guys.
With these World's Fairs, it was all brand new. This is what they tell us. It was meant to be temporary, so they used plaster of Paris and wood and all these other structures. And if you look at the pictures, that's not what you see. You see these massive masonry structures that look like what you see in Europe. They had these in places like Chicago, Omaha, Portland, Seattle, Guatemala. They had them in Tasmania,
Georgia, Louisiana, Ohio, Canada.
Each one of these fairs, each one was built in 2 years or less. Each one was magically populated by millions of people that came from all over the realm to participate in this event.
They started with the Crystal Palace exposition in 1851. So what they tell us in 9 months, from the moment they conceived of it to when it was built, it was 9 months of getting it all together in this gigantic plate glass structure with fountains and trains and all the bells and whistles. Now, supposedly, they moved that entire structure to a different location in London in 1854, and that in the 1930s, that burned down. So, show pictures of this Crystal Palace structure, which is massive, and all the things that are there. Oh, we have to move that, no problem. Oops, it burned down, which is typically what happened to a lot of these World's Fair structures.
If you can erase it from history, people don't see it as a potential future. And I think that in itself is, for me, the moral of hiding history, about hiding the old world. It just doesn't make logical sense to me to build something so grand and then just destroy it.
Really, those was an excuse to take existing infrastructure, build some little bullshit around it, and then when you're finished with your so-called fair, it gives you an excuse to tear everything down and nobody questions you.
They might have built a couple of these buildings, and you can actually tell the buildings that they built because they look like dog shit. Now, we have buildings that can hold 10,000 people, huge, giant buildings that look like they were made for a larger race of people, where they say they built it in 2 years, 600 acres, which is, I think, something like 27 million square feet. It's absolutely insane, the amount of architecture they say they built in 2 years.
As an architect and somebody who's been building my entire life, designing houses and buildings for 20 years or so, the time frames that they allow for just the planning, the idea that that could just be planned out in 2 years begs credulity.
They had these ornate buildings with all kind of moving sidewalks and crazy technology. They had ill things with so many lights, electricity, when electricity was supposed to be a new thing and all of that. They had shit that was like something out of a dream, bro.
Well, these are the expositions. They were fully electrified. You know, some of these examples, they're electrified before electric was a thing. You know, the first electrified city was supposed to be Buffalo. First electrified building was supposed to be JP Morgan's in New York, all attributed to Edison. But these things, you know, some of them 1890s, fully electric, and it would have been free energy. They didn't have massive plants to generate electricity.
The first one in America was in 1876, and that was the Centennial World's Fair in Philadelphia. The one in 1901 in Buffalo was a major one. The 1904 in St. Louis was Louisiana Purchase, and then the Lewis and Clark was in Portland the following year. If you define the word exposition, it's telling a story. It's setting the stage, the narration. So these World's Fairs were used as, this is the narrative that we want people to believe and go home with.
The World Fairs served to get people with the new program. They said, trains, incubator babies, this is the new norm. Fast forwarding people into the modern industrial age. Everyone's wearing the same beaver hats. Everyone's wearing the same three-piece suit. You know, it seemed like individuality had ceased to exist. The World's Fairs served the purpose of indoctrinating.
The World Columbian Exposition was one of the most superb. In Chicago, Illinois, formerly known as Chilaga, had some of the most beautiful stone masonry in the world. The area was nicknamed the White City, as each building was strategically painted bright white in an attempt to hide the inevitable aging of the structural entity. The mainstream narrative would lead you to believe that these megastructures were designed by the most educated and experienced architects. Right?
The architect, he didn't have any formal training.
What on earth would give you that idea?
Isn't that what the website said, right?
So your website.
Your website said that the architect of this building has no formal training.
That's...
Here.
I find that implausible.
This is your website.
We all do. That's why.
That's my problem. I'm not sure if there were even any schools of architecture back then.
How did they know how to do this, though? That's what we're asking.
This is not built for dinosaurs, the Field Museum. It was built for something else. It's not to show off the fake dinosaur bones. It was for something else. When you walk inside, you can see the doors are much bigger than the size we are. It's nothing like what we build today.
The Museum of Science and Industry, which was the arts building, the fine arts building. And they make the argument that that was a temporary building like all the others, and the public liked it so much that they rallied to save it. So what they did is they went and rebuilt it out of granite and marble and copper and all the permanent materials that we see now. I think these are children's stories that they give us. I don't understand at all how serious-minded people can accept a story that says this building was built exactly as we see it now, but with temporary materials. And then because we liked it, it got rebuilt out of granite and marble and copper and glass. To me, that defies explanation and is much more of a fanciful tale than the idea that that building was already there and was repurposed for a fair.
This one connects to the Shedd Aquarium, I guarantee it, and it connects to a lot more buildings around this area. And it's not just here, it's in every single city in the world.
You know we on top of water.
We're on water.
We on water. So we on top of water. You go in the basement, you will hit the water, hit the wall, and then sometimes when it rain, because the sewer be flooded sometimes, the water come in the basement, flood the whole basement.
Oh my God.
Thoughts on that?
That's exactly what we're talking about.
Before we leave it, press him on that. What do you got on that?
Okay, so there's massive tunnel systems throughout all of these buildings everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
So you're telling us right now that there's tunnels. Basically, there's a basement here. This building is much bigger than we can see on the ground surface.
It's a basement. It's a basement here. When the wall you hit, when you go in the basement, we do rounds. What we call our rounds called the ground level, and then we got upper level. So when we go downstairs to certain hallways, you will hear water hitting the walls.
Wow. You have seen the tunnel systems underneath these buildings?
According to the information gathered from my grandfather, who got here in Chicago in 1969, well, before that, as far as for what we have here from the museum we're in now, from the Field Museum to the Shedd Aquarium to Soldier Field, there are the pathways underneath that are all connected.
It's like if you go to McCormick Place, if you go, they got the little tunnels over there too, because they be flooding over there too.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's connected, you think?
Yeah. So this whole campus, the whole campus is connected. And it's tunnels. I was told there's tunnels, you know what I'm saying? It's like the tunnels along the lake that you can go down in, and then it leads you into like a little path. But you know, I heard that from somebody that he was working for 43 years.
Really?
Been here for 43 years. He been here for 43 years. He retired, I want to say like last week sometime.
Have you ever been in them?
No, sir. They won't allow access to the public.
Okay.
And then they only allow access to very, very few of their actual workers here.
So you think that dirt in that picture downstairs, you think the dirt is actually there and we put it there to cover up this building, to make it look like it's not as big as it really is?
That's a good one. That's good. I feel like we did though. I feel like he made the picture to fake like, I feel like the building was here already.
What do you tell your child when you're coming to a new location and they're asking you questions and you have no answers? You will start to create so that way you have a way to answer those questions, or your child will grow up with no answers and forever seeking. So
now we're here to give answers.
There you go.
When they say that these buildings were temporary, what they're basically suggesting is that it's a full-scale model. That is going to be occupied by thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that are coming in and out of these fairs, where they're going to hold together through brutal winters, through hurricanes, through potential earthquakes, with hundreds and thousands of people occupying these spaces. The liability on that alone would have shut the whole endeavor down from the beginning. It wouldn't have been permitted. It's not the kind of thing that's permissible when you're talking about the building trades, when you're talking about a public facility where you're going to be bringing so many people.
Now, this takes a huge infrastructure, and it takes a huge amount of people to do something like this. When you see these ridiculous construction photos where it's like popsicle sticks, clear manipulation.
All right, so right here you can see they just put the scaffolding up, just like they've done in the past in the original pictures of the construction. Yeah, and they're doing it right now. How hard would it be to just make it black and white and then make it look like they're doing some construction right now? NASA's not the only company to fake a photo, guys.
With a lot of these old, glorious buildings, regardless of where they are, you'll find supposed, alleged construction photos. Now, many of these will show simply scaffolding around an already constructed building. If you take an old cathedral and put scaffolding around it, and you're the first person ever to have that cathedral photographed, well, you are ripe to make a case for yourself that you may have built that to begin with, whereas you might have just been renovating that cathedral, repainting it, fixing it. Old, primitive photo manipulation techniques.
Wooden sidewalks and mud roads, you have to be able to bring all the stone and brick and glass and copper and all the component parts. You have to be able to bring that to the site. And so just the roads alone, like you can scratch and sniff any aspect of this and the story starts to crumble. But if you're printing these in books or you're presenting them like on maybe a TV documentary, let's say, and it's just an image that's going to come and go, and 99.9% right, of people looking at them are not even going to scratch their head. They're going to just say, well, there it is. There's the construction photo, and I don't need anything else, because why would I question that? That's absurd.